Jon stood at the crest of a windswept dune, gazing over the sun-scorched plains that stretched eastward toward Slaver's Bay. He inhaled the baking air and tasted salt and dust on his tongue, reflecting on how far they had come. From Winterfell's cold courtyards, from Volantis's shadowy temples, from Braavos's labyrinth of canals. At his side stood Daenerys Targaryen, a trio of infant dragons clinging to her shoulders and arms, tails twitching with restless energy. Her face shone with determination beneath a thin veil of sweat, silver-gold hair stirring in the wind. Behind them sprawled a makeshift encampment of tents, wagons, and tethered horses, the traveling force that Jon and Daenerys had cobbled together over recent weeks. Freedmen who followed Jon since he first freed them in Volantis, the second sons under Daario Naharis's flamboyant leadership, and a handful of red priests, including Tormund. The sun blazed high, merciless. They had wandered inland from the cove where Shadowfire, Jon's monstrous black dragon, had reunited with Daenerys's 3 hatchlings. Traveling at dawn and dusk, they avoided the worst midday heat. Still, the journey had worn on them. The freedmen, most of whom had once toiled in oppressive conditions, proved hardy, but the second sons grumbled that the desert offered little comfort. Daario had responded by plying them with stories of conquest and coming glory. Jon knew that the promise of riches alone could not hold a Sellsword company forever, but the presence of 4 dragons, especially the towering Shadowfire, convinced them this cause might yield unimaginable reward. Off to one side of the encampment, Shadowfire lay half-coiled in the sand, a gargantuan shape that dwarfed the tents. Even from here, Jon glimpsed the black scales shimmering like obsidian under the harsh sunlight. The smaller dragons, Daenerys's brood, had grown in the weeks since leaving Braavos, each now the size of a large hound. They snapped at scorpions or small desert rodents, devouring them in delight whenever they scuttled by. Daenerys had named them Rhaegal for the green one, Viserion for the pale cream, and Drogon for the red-black. Yet people still referred to them in hushes as the hatchlings, overshadowed by the behemoth that Jon commanded. Beside a canvas shelter pitched atop firmer ground, Viserys stood watching. He had made a point of refusing to accompany Jon and Daenerys on scouting rides, citing the heat and dust. Yet the glower on his face told another story: seething jealousy. Ever since Daenerys and Jon had begun forging a plan for Slaver's Bay, discussing alliances, strategies, how to deploy dragons, Viserys had been pointedly excluded from major decisions. The freedmen, who revered Jon and Daenerys as liberators, despised Viserys' rants about birthright and conquest. The second sons found him laughable, an untested princeling overshadowed by 2 proven dragon handlers. Even Tormund, who once tried to honor all Targaryens equally, now focused his counsel on Daenerys and Jon, believing them chosen by R'hlloreth's flame. Viserys had become irrelevant, which only stoked his fury. Daenerys breathed out, scanning the horizon. "Astapor lies south and east," she murmured to Jon. "A city famed for its unsullied, a storehouse of elite slave soldiers. If we can free them, we gain an army that might unify Slaver's Bay." Jon nodded. Daario claims the second sons can handle lesser garrisons, but the unsullied are a formidable force. We must approach carefully. Liberating slaves requires more than raw might. We must show them a new order worth fighting for. Daenerys's expression hardened. "I will not tolerate the chains that mar the land. If we seize Astapor and break the masters, the unsullied might rally to us freely. But I know the risks. We must ensure the freedmen remain disciplined. The moment the city sees a dragon overhead, the slavers might slaughter captives rather than yield." Jon frowned, recalling the times he had confronted slavers near Volantis. "A precise plan, then. My freedmen can infiltrate from the outskirts, urging the enslaved to hide or rebel at the right moment. The second sons can strike the gates. Shadowfire and your 3 can ensure no master tries to slaughter the unsullied en masse. If we succeed in Astapor, Yunkai and Meereen might follow." The notion chilled him, for it implied a campaign of conquest on a scale none of them had undertaken before. Yet Daenerys had insisted that Slaver's Bay was the logical proving ground for Targaryen might, forging a kingdom based on liberation rather than subjugation. Their dragons needed space to grow and test their flames. The freedmen needed a cause more noble than gold. This, Daenerys maintained, was that cause. Behind them, footsteps crunched on sand. Daario Naharis appeared, flashing a grin beneath his blue-dyed mustache. "My queen and king. Though who truly bears the crown, I wonder?" He gave a flourish. "Our scouts confirm that Astapor is less than a week's march from here. The city's walls are tall, but not impregnable. The slavers rely on Unsullied for outward defense, plus a handful of hired guards. If we time our assault at dawn, we might overwhelm them before they can muster a response." Jon shrugged off the king remark. "Dawn attacks carry risk. The Unsullied are disciplined, no matter the hour. We must ensure they see us not as invaders but as saviors. If they resist out of obedience to the masters, it'll be a bloody fight." His gaze flicked to Daenerys. "Could you speak to them, perhaps? Or find a way to break their discipline without killing them?" Daenerys rested a hand on Drogon's sleek neck. The little dragon hissed, black wings rustling. "We might parley with the good masters," she said quietly, pretending to negotiate for Unsullied. "Then once inside the city, we expose the hypocrisy and free the slaves from within. The presence of dragons might terrify them into surrender. If that fails, our freedmen and the Second Sons can seize the gates and open the city. The Unsullied might switch sides once they see the slavers undone." Daario chuckled. "An audacious plan. I like it. Let me guess. Viserys remains behind, sulking in a tent while the real Targaryens reshape the world." Daenerys averted her gaze, unsettled by the mockery, but she did not deny it. Viserys had proven worthless in matters of strategy. Each time they tried to include him, he boasted about ruling Westeros and demanded immediate attacks. Slavers Bay was but a stepping stone in his mind, a means to earn gold and soldiers for a direct assault on King's Landing. He cared little about actual liberation. Daenerys was done indulging his arrogance. Jon cleared his throat. "We'll finalize the plan tonight. We push out at first light tomorrow, heading for Astapor. Once we're close, Daenerys can approach the gates with a small retinue. Daario, you and the Second Sons will flank from the west. The freedmen gather in the dunes to the north, waiting for a signal. If negotiations fail, we strike." Daario gave a flourishing bow. "As you command, O father of the big black beast." He winked at Daenerys, who rolled her eyes. Then he strode off to relay instructions to his lieutenants. Jon turned to Daenerys, exhaling. "I'll talk to Tormund about ensuring minimal bloodshed. If the good masters remain defiant, we'll have no choice but to unleash dragons. But let's try not to raise the city. We need the infrastructure intact for the freed slaves to build upon." Daenerys nodded firmly. "We will show the slavers that Targaryens rule with justice, not cruelty." She brushed a wisp of hair aside, pale strands clinging to her damp cheek. "Let's go." They descended the dune to the bustling camp, each step stirring the soft sand. Freedmen paused their chores to nod respectfully, hope shining in their eyes. They knew Jon as the one who had liberated them from chains. They saw Daenerys as the mother of dragons who promised freedom for all. Together, the pair embodied a new Targaryen ideal, one that stood firmly against the old legacy of tyranny. Viserys watched them pass, face stony. His fists tightened at his sides, knuckles white. He had no illusions that they cared for his input anymore. He felt overshadowed by his sister and nephew, who had stolen the loyalty of freedmen and sellswords alike. No one listened when he demanded a fleet be assembled to invade Westeros. Even the Red Priests seemed besotted with Daenerys's gentle approach. Hatred festered in his heart, a seed of poison that thrived on envy. That night, fires flickered across the camp, their glow casting dancing shadows on the dunes. Jon stood near a large brazier, conferring with Tormund and Daario. They pored over a rough map of Astapor sketched on tan parchment. Meanwhile, Daenerys oversaw the final feeding of her 3 dragons, assisted by freedmen who had grown adept at slicing raw meat. Shadowfire rumbled from his chosen spot beyond the ring of tents, occasionally belching a plume of smoke that drifted overhead. The The stench of charred carrion clung to the night air. Viserys hovered at the edges, arms folded, scowling. Jon traced a finger along the map. Astapor's walls circle the city in an uneven ellipse. The main gate is here, opening onto the Red Waste. The good masters live in tall pyramids near the waterfront, under the shadow of the Temple of Graces. The unsullied barracks line the southwestern quarter. Daario nodded, pointing out potential vantage points for archers. Tormund muttered about blessings, cautioning them not to rely on unbridled slaughter. Freedmen representatives insisted that slaves inside the city might revolt if given the chance. Jon took mental notes, trying to integrate all concerns. Around midnight, Daenerys joined them. Her face glowed with excitement tempered by worry. The dragons sense something, I swear. Drogon especially has become more restless. He tries short flights, flapping from tent to tent. She shot a glance at Shadowfire's hulking form. He yearns to emulate your dragon, but he's not ready. Soon, though, all three might fly properly. Then Slaver's Bay will quake. Jon offered a faint smile. Slaver's Bay might quake tomorrow anyway, if your ruse succeeds. We must trust that fear of dragons can avert a full-scale battle. He turned to Tormund. Any last counsel from R'hllorys flames? The priest shook his head. Only flickers of shadow. The future remains uncertain. Blood will spill, but perhaps less than in a typical siege. Daario tapped the map, changing the subject. We'll take 200 of the Second Sons around the western approach. Once we see your signal, likely a dragon overhead, we'll storm the gate. The freedmen can flank from the north. Meanwhile, you and Daenerys parley. He grinned. A tidy plan, if you ask me. Viserys, lurking behind, could bear it no longer. He stepped forward, jabbing a finger at the map. You scheme to conquer a city of slavers, fine. But you do it without me, the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. Leading? I should command the army, not be sidelined while my sister and her bastard nephew posture as saviors. Jon's jaw tightened. We've discussed this. You have no experience leading men in battle. We can't afford reckless orders that cost lives. If you want to help, you can remain with the freedmen and keep them steady once the fighting starts. But Daenerys and I will handle the rest. Viserys' face reddened. You insult me. I was born to rule. Daenerys is a child who stumbled onto 3 eggs. You, some bastard from the north who pretends Targaryen blood. I. Daenerys' eyes flashed with anger. Enough, brother. You sully our name with your tantrums. We are forging a new Targaryen path, not repeating father's cruelty. Either stand with us or stand aside. Tormund placed a soothing hand on Daenerys' arm, but her temper burned. Viserys spat at the sand. You would dare speak to me thus? He glowered, voice trembling. You overshadow me. The freedmen worship you. The Cell's words flock to you. The Red Priests hail you as a savior. And Jon struts about with his monstrous dragon like he's the true heir. Where does that leave me? Jon exchanged a glance with Daenerys, pity welling despite his frustration. We leave you with a choice, he said evenly. Help us free slaves or remain behind. Do not sabotage us. Viserys made a strangled noise, then stormed off, vanishing into the darkness beyond the brazier's glow. Daario exhaled, shaking his head. I've seen petty lords with more sense. Let him sulk. We have more pressing matters. Daenerys' fists relaxed. He was once my only family, but each day he drifts further from reason. Her voice trembled, but she masked it by turning back to the map. Let us proceed. They refined the plan a while longer, then parted to snatch what rest they could before dawn. Daenerys checked on her dragons one last time, ensuring each had a warm bed of coals. Jon took a moment to see Ghost, who dozed in a patch of shade. The dire wolf, half-resurrected, had grown steadier on his feet, though an eerie aura lingered about him. Sometimes freedmen whispered that the wolf was a harbinger of doom, but Jon dismissed such talk. Ghost was loyal if changed. Tormund insisted that R'hllorys' blessing meant the wolf had a role yet to play. When the eastern sky began to pale, the camp stirred. Freedmen packed tents, The second sons readied weapons, and the red priests performed short rituals to fortify courage. Daenerys gathered her dragons, coaxing Drogon to rest inside a specially crafted wooden enclosure for travel. Rhaegal and Viserion hissed at the confining walls, but once fed, they acquiesced. Shadowfire spread colossal wings, blocking out the early light as Jon approached. Carefully, Jon climbed into a crude saddle strapped between the dragon's spikes. He could sense the beast's pent-up energy, a living storm of flame. If negotiations broke down, Shadowfire would be the final argument. Daario and his men mounted their horses, riding west in a cloud of dust. Freedmen formed ranks in the north. Daenerys took a smaller retinue, including a handful of freedmen and red priests, plus her caged dragons. Viserys was nowhere to be seen at departure, presumably ignoring them in protest. The journey to Astapor unfolded smoothly under the rising sun. By midday, they glimpsed the city's crimson brick walls shining in the distance, tall gates sealed. Towers jutted from the perimeter, each topped by a banner depicting a harpy, the symbol of the city's slavers. Jon thought of the countless slaves within, many unsullied. Freedmen scouts had told stories of the Unsullied's brutal training, the thousands who perished in pursuit of that legendary discipline. Now, he and Daenerys intended to turn that discipline against the masters, or at least break it to set those men free. They halted a short distance from the city, within sight of the walls. The freedmen took up a discreet position behind dunes. Daario's second sons circled wide, disappearing into the haze. Jon perched on Shadowfire, scanning for watchers. Indeed, sentinels paced the ramparts. They would have spotted the black dragon by now, or at least glimpsed it in the shimmering air. Daenerys dismounted from her horse, adjusting her cloak, then gestured for Tormund and a freedman named Yora to accompany her to the main gate. Jon would remain behind a small dune with Shadowfire, prepared to take flight if needed. Daenerys carried a single crate containing Drogon, who hissed restlessly. Rhaegal and Viserion stayed back with freedmen, awaiting a signal. At the gate, an overseer demanded their purpose. Daenerys announced she was a traveler from distant lands, come to purchase Unsullied. The overseer eyed her suspiciously but allowed them inside after some debate. The wide gate creaked open, revealing Astapor's brick-paved streets. Searing heat radiated from every surface. Daenerys's retinue advanced, flanked by armed slave soldiers who guided them to a courtyard. White columns ringed the space, overseen by tall pyramids where good masters lounged. The stench of sweat and spices mingled in the air. Slaves in collars hurried by, eyes downcast. Daenerys waited calmly until the good masters emerged, each robed in crimson finery. The lead master, Krasny's Emo Naklas, surveyed her with contempt. "You wish to buy Unsullied? We have the finest in the world," he sneered. A translator relayed his high Valyrian insults, though Daenerys understood Valyrian perfectly well. She feigned ignorance, letting the translator's sanitized version wash over her. Krasny's ranted about coin, demanding a fortune for the initial batch. Tormund stood behind Daenerys, hands folded, carefully ignoring the outraged looks at his red priest robes. Yora, the freedman, tried to maintain a humble posture. Daenerys flicked a glance at the crate where Drogon hissed softly. "I offer something more valuable than mere gold," she said. "An alliance with House Targaryen and a living dragon." The translator relayed this, spiking interest. Krasny's eyes gleamed with greed. He demanded to see the dragon. Daenerys obliged, unlatching the crate. Drogon crawled out, letting out a babyish roar that flared tiny flames. Gasps echoed among the good masters. Krasny's mockery vanished, replaced by avarice. He muttered in Valyrian about seizing the dragon, but the translator provided a tamer summary. "I propose a trade," Daenerys stated. "You deliver all your Unsullied, every last one, fully trained, plus a promise to release the slaves of Astapor. In exchange, you claim this dragon." Tormund stiffened at her side, uncertain if she was serious or bluffing. The freedman Yora looked alarmed. But Daenerys's face remained composed, recalling the plan. to lure the good masters into relinquishing control. Once they accepted the trade and handed over the Unsullied, the rest would follow. Krasny's conferred with the other masters. They eyed the little dragon hungrily. Daenerys exhaled, longing for the moment when the city would realize they had no real power once the Targaryens took charge. She waited with forced patience while Krasny's boasted about the Unsullied's discipline, explaining each soldier cost a fortune. The translator tried to maintain courtesy, but Krasny's sneers in Valyrian made it clear he thought Daenerys a foolish girl. Still, the lure of a dragon overcame caution. With perfunctory ceremony, the good masters agreed. They would hand over their entire Unsullied force and disclaim any interest in the city's other slaves. The exact wording danced around compliance, but Daenerys caught the gist. They would relinquish ownership once the dragon was in their hands. They set the arrangement for next morning in the Plaza of Pride, near the city's main thoroughfare. Daenerys nodded, feigning satisfaction. Then it is settled. We will finalize the exchange at sunrise. She paused, letting her voice ring in the courtyard. I trust you will not dishonor your word, for I am not as generous as I may appear. Krasny's laughed cruelly, remarking in Valyrian that once he had the dragon, he could do as he pleased. Daenerys said nothing, only motioned for her retinue to leave. She recreated Drogon with care. The Watchers parted, gawking at the small monster that spat sparks. Freedmen in the streets glimpsed the scene, uncertain. Daenerys signaled to Yora. Spread word quietly, she said in a low murmur. That help is coming. The slaves should be ready. They exited the gates unharassed. Outside, Daenerys found Jon waiting with Shadowfire in the dunes. She quickly recounted the arrangement, mindful that it was half lie. I promised them Drogon, but once we hold the Unsullied, we'll reveal that the masters have lost all claims. We liberate the city by force if needed. Jon nodded, relieved. They agreed so easily? They lust for a dragon. They assume I'm naive. Tomorrow we'll show them otherwise. She glanced at the horizon, where freedmen scouts signaled that the Second Sons were in position. Let's prepare for dawn. I'll keep Drogon caged until the final moment. Meanwhile, you circle overhead with Shadowfire. If they try treachery, we strike. Jon agreed, though worry nagged him. The masters might attempt to seize Daenerys or kill the Unsullied. But if they truly believed the Targaryens would cede a living dragon, perhaps greed would cloud their caution. The freedmen readied themselves for an urban rebellion, armed with spears and short swords. The Second Sons sharpened blades, anticipating a swift assault if negotiations faltered. Tormund uttered prayers for minimal bloodshed, and Viserys, still nowhere to be seen. Some freedmen reported that he sulked in a side camp, cursing his sister's name. Jon let him be. No sense provoking a last-minute crisis. The night passed slowly, tension thick in the air. Daenerys dozed fitfully in a small tent. Drogon nestled near. Rhaegal and Viserion stayed with freedmen who whispered soothing lullabies. Shadowfire prowled, occasionally flaring his wings. Jon rested in snatches, haunted by images of Astapor's slaves rising in chaos. At last, the sky began to lighten. The desert wind carried faint sounds of a city stirring. Jon roused the camp. Freedmen took up arms. The Second Sons quietly advanced on the city's western perimeter. Daenerys donned simple garb, her hair braided tight, a dagger at her waist. She carried Drogon's crate. Together, they walked toward Astapor's gate. Krasny's awaited them in the Plaza of Pride, flanked by guards and a small retinue of lesser masters. Rows of Unsullied stood at attention, their faces blank. The sun's early rays glinted off their spears and helmets. Daenerys walked with measured grace, crate in hand, while Tormund and Yora followed. Jon lingered outside, perched on Shadowfire, scanning for any sign of treachery. Freedmen watchers hid in alleyways. Dario's men crept along side streets, ready to converge. Krasny's bowed theatrically, spouting polite words through his translator while muttering insults in Valyrian. Daenerys feigned ignorance. The good masters presented her a ceremonial whip, symbol of authority over the Unsullied. Daenerys accepted it, heart pounding. Then she extended the crate. Krasny's eyes shone, and he reached for the latch. The moment he touched it, Drogon let out a screech, pushing the crate's lid. Krasny's jumped back, startled. The translator stammered as Daenerys parted the crate's top. Drogon emerged, hissing. Krasny's greed overcame his fear. He stepped forward to seize the chain that Daenerys had looped around the dragon's neck. Daenerys let the chain slip from her fingers. The Unsullied remained motionless, uncertain. Daenerys raised the whip high. "You hold the chain, but do you understand the dragon?" she asked in Valyrian. Krasny's blinked, confused that she spoke Valyrian so fluently. Her voice rose. "Unsullied," she shouted in perfect Valyrian. "I am Daenerys Targaryen. You are free. No one owns you anymore." A ripple of shock passed through the ranks. Krasny spluttered in protest, ordering the Unsullied to seize her. But they hesitated, hearing the confidence in her tone. Yora raised a sword, Torm chanted. Freedmen emerged from alleys, weapons drawn. Dario's men charged from side streets. Chaos erupted. Krasny's shrieked commands, but the Unsullied faltered, uncertain whether to obey. Daenerys pointed the whip. "Slay the masters or spare them, your choice. You obey no one but yourselves now." Some masters tried to whip slaves into action, but freedmen lunged, knives flashing. The plaza filled with shouts. Krasny spun toward Daenerys, brandishing the chain. Drogon hissed, spouting a burst of flame. Krasny screamed as his robe caught fire. He stumbled back, cursing. Meanwhile, a host of freedmen flooded in, subduing lesser masters. The Unsullied, disciplined but unbound, began turning their spears on the slavers. Astapor's guard collapsed. Daenerys stood in the center of the maelstrom, whip clenched in her fist, Drogon on her shoulder. She yelled above the din, "Let no child be harmed. Let no freed slave be shackled again." Yora and Torm protected her flanks, cutting down any stray slaver who attempted an attack. The plaza rang with steel on brick. Smoke rose where freedmen set fire to a harpy statue. From above, a deafening roar signaled Shadowfire's arrival. Jon soared overhead, the colossal dragon casting a vast shadow across the plaza. The good masters who tried to flee found their path cut off by the Second Sons, whose crossbows twanged, felling overseers. Some slavers collapsed, begging for mercy. The city's slaves poured from side streets, tearing off collars, taking up rocks or stolen knives. The revolt spread like wildfire. Krasny's, half-burned, crawled away, screeching for help. Daenerys approached, resolute. She stared down at him, then turned to a pair of newly freed slaves. "His fate is yours to decide," she said softly, stepping away. The slaves glared at him, hatred in their eyes. She did not watch as they ended him with savage blows. Her chest tightened. Another death on the path to liberation. Above, Jon circled on Shadowfire. He saw the city's gates open as freedmen flooded in from the dunes. The Second Sons secured the walls, raising new banners. Astapor fell in a matter of hours. By midday, the final holdouts were cornered in a pyramid. Daenerys marched with freedmen and Unsullied up the winding steps, each footfall echoing in the newly silent streets. The slavers within surrendered without a fight once they saw the black dragon perched on a rooftop, smoke curling from its maw. In the aftermath, Daenerys gathered the Unsullied in the plaza again. Thousands of disciplined soldiers stood in perfect ranks. She addressed them in Valyrian, voice echoing against battered walls. "You are free. You owe me nothing. If you wish to leave, go. If you stay, fight beside me as equals, not as property." A hush fell. The Unsullied looked among themselves. Then, as one, they clapped spear to shield, choosing to stand with the woman who had broken their chains. A roar of triumph rippled among the freedmen. Dario and the Second Sons watched with approval, though they recognized they might soon be overshadowed by an army of Unsullied. Jon dismounted from Shadowfire, joining Daenerys at the front. She turned to him, tears in her eyes. "We did it. The city is ours, the slaves freed. Jon glanced at the columns of newly liberated men. The air smelled of ash and sweat. It's your triumph, he murmured. But yes, we shape a new order. He pressed a hand to her shoulder. The freedmen cheered, chanting Mysa and other praises. Drogon flapped overhead, meeting Rhaegal and Viserion, who soared in delight. Even Shadowfire let out a resonant bellow that shook the rubble. Behind them, Viserys sulked, his tunic dusty. He had entered the city late, after the fighting subsided, greeted with indifference by freedmen who revered Daenerys. He lingered near the gate, cursing under his breath. While Daenerys and Jon received adulation, he was once again shoved aside. A day later, Astapor's new governance began to take shape. Daenerys decreed that no slaver or overseer would hold authority. Freed slaves formed councils to distribute food, repair damage, and plan for a future free of bondage. The Unsullied accepted Daenerys as a liberator, though she insisted they remain unforced in their allegiance. Jon worked with freedmen and second sons to keep order, ensuring no vengeful riots destroyed the city's infrastructure. Tormund and other Red Priests offered healing to the wounded, chanting R'hllorest blessings in the main square. Shadowfire perched near a gutted temple, occasionally devouring a scrawny bull the freedmen offered. Daenerys's 3 young dragons prowled rooftops, admired or feared by passers-by. Some freedmen whispered that the Targaryens were living gods, though Jon discouraged such talk. Viserys wandered among the newly freed crowds, fuming. When he tried to assert his rank as King Viserys, they dismissed him. Some freedmen laughed openly, calling him the overshadowed brother. Furious, he retreated to a side chamber in an abandoned pyramid. Jon found him there one afternoon, pacing like a caged animal. "You usurp my birthright," Viserys snarled the moment Jon appeared. "Daenerys is hailed as a queen, and you are revered as her partner in conquest. I am nothing in the eyes of these wretches." Jon sighed, leaning against a broken pillar. "Daenerys freed them. She earned their loyalty. I aided her, but it's her compassion that wins hearts. You did nothing but brood." Viserys bared his teeth. "I had no place in your plans. You exclude me at every turn. I am the rightful Targaryen king, not her. She was meant to be my pawn. Now she stands atop a freed city, and I stand alone." His voice trembled. "I won't be sidelined forever." Jon studied him, pity mingled with annoyance. "Take a lesson. People follow those who act. If you want them to respect you, do something worthy. Gloating about your birthright doesn't free slaves or feed the hungry." Viserys spat on the floor. "I'd rather see them all kneel by force than coddle them with illusions of freedom." He turned away, shoulders shaking. "One day, Jon Snow, no, Aegon Targaryen, whatever you call yourself, I'll show you that your soft ways only lead to chaos." Jon opened his mouth to retort but decided it was pointless. He left Viserys to his bitterness, stepping back out into the bright sun. Freed children scurried across the plaza, giggling around the smaller dragons who soared from rooftop to rooftop. Daenerys stood by a fountain, dispensing water to a throng of weary ex-slaves. Daario flanked her, grinning. Tormund offered blessings. Jon recognized this moment for what it was: the beginning of a new campaign. Astapor was only the first link in Slaver's Bay. If they truly intended to end slavery here, Yunkai and Meereen must follow. That night, Daenerys summoned Jon, Daario, Tormund, and freedmen leaders to the pyramid's grand hall, now stripped of slaver trophies. The roar of the crowd outside drifted through open windows. Torches ringed the hall with flickering light. Daenerys presided at a simple wooden table, wearing a loose white tunic that replaced the dusty cloak from earlier. Drogon perched on a windowsill, red eyes shining. Jon took a seat beside her. Daario lounged, boots on a shattered marble bench, ever the rogue. Freedmen representatives stood respectfully. Viserys was not present. Daenerys had explicitly not invited him. She gestured for silence. "Astapor is free. The Unsullied have joined us willingly. The freedmen now govern themselves." But the slavers in Yunkai and Meereen will not stand idle. They may attempt to retake Astapor by force or hire mercenaries to crush us. She looked at Dario. What intelligence do your scouts bring? Dario tapped the hilt of his blade. Yunkai, to the north, is smaller but heavily reliant on Sel's words. The city is ringed by walls, less formidable than Astapor's, but they keep enough gold to buy loyalties. Meereen, further upriver, is the jewel of Slavers Bay, the largest city with a strong defensive posture. Each day we delay, they might fortify or strike first. A freedman woman named Brinna spoke up. We freedmen yearn to liberate Yunkai. Rumors say they hold thousands of slaves in dire conditions. If we move swiftly, we might sow rebellion as we did here. She glanced nervously at Daenerys's dragons. Though a single victory does not guarantee all Slavers Bay will bow. Daenerys ran a hand along Drogon's sleek scales. Nor do we want them to bow as slaves. We aim to end the trade, not to force new masters on them. She paused. But we cannot let them muster armies to retake Astapor. So we press on, either by negotiation or open conflict. I prefer minimal bloodshed, but I won't shrink from using dragons if needed. Jon folded his arms. Shadowfire alone can terrify a city into submission, but I recall your vow not to become a tyrant. We must strike a balance. Show them we're serious, yet not unleash wanton destruction. If they cling to their chains, we break them. If they yield, we spare them. Dario smirked. Mercy mingled with might, a curious combination. Yet I see how it earned you Astapor. He flourished a hand. The second sons stand ready to carve through any sellswords Yunkai hires. Just point us in the right direction. We'll march at dawn. Torrum added a quiet note of caution. Beware the cost of constant war, my prince and princess. Lawloress flame shows me glimpses of darkness. Freedmen can be swayed by cruelty or turned astray if desperation sets in. Keep your moral compass, or you risk becoming the very slavers you despise. Daenerys bowed her head in acknowledgement. Well said. We walk a fine line. Let us finalize the route. We move up the coast. Let the freedmen and unsullied march by land, while dragons keep watch from the sky. We approach Yunkai's gates within a fortnight. Meanwhile, Astapor will remain under the Freedmen's Council. I'll leave a fraction of the Unsullied to maintain order. If the city thrives, it sends a message to the rest of Slavers Bay. No one argued. This approach suited them all. The freedmen at the table saluted. Dario nodded approvingly. Torrum offered a prayer for wisdom. Daenerys dismissed them, beckoning Jon to linger. Once they were alone in the echoing chamber, Drogon prowled closer, sniffing at Jon's boots. Daenerys stroked the dragon absent-mindedly. I wonder how Westeros would view us now, she whispered. We are forging a kingdom in Essos, not the 7 kingdoms father lost. Viserys hates that we've delayed sailing west. Jon met her gaze. If King Robert remains at peace, perhaps it's best we remain here. I sense you and I can do more good in Slavers Bay, restoring dignity to the enslaved. Someday we might address the Iron Throne. But not now. He hesitated, brushing hair from her cheek. We have so much to build first. The freedmen rely on us to keep them safe from re-enslavement. A fragile smile touched her lips. You speak as though we share a throne, cousin, or nephew, or however our lineage entangles. I only know that together we stand stronger than alone. He nodded, uncertain how to label their relationship. Targaryen blood complicated everything, yet he felt closer to Daenerys than to anyone else. They parted for the night, forging silent resolve. The next day would begin the march on Yunkai. The city needed to see that Astapor's liberation was no fluke. Freedmen from across the region would join or rebel, depending on whether they believed this new Targaryen coalition unstoppable. Morning arrived in a blaze of desert heat. Soldiers stirred, freedmen loaded wagons. The new Astapori Council offered provisions, grain, salted fish, casks of water. A fraction of Unsullied stayed behind, under a freedman captain. The rest, thousands strong, formed disciplined ranks outside the city. Daenerys oversaw final details, her 3 dragons flitting about. Jon circled on Shadowfire overhead, scanning for trouble. In a small courtyard behind the city's main thoroughfare, Viserys appeared, arms folded. He watched Daenerys lead the troops, his expression twisted by envy. Every freedman, every unsullied soldier, looked to her for guidance, ignoring him entirely. With midday approaching, the Targaryen-led force departed Astapor. Daenerys rode at the forefront, accompanied by a few freedman lords and Tormund. Daario took the second sons along the column's flanks, quipping that any bandit or marauder would flee at the sight of so many trained spear points. Jon soared overhead whenever possible, though the blazing sun made extended flight challenging. He'd let Shadowfire hunt for whales or large creatures whenever they neared the coast. The smaller dragons stayed near Daenerys, riding in open cages on wagons. Viserys followed sullenly, refusing to speak. Freedmen rumored he spent nights muttering in his tent. After a week's journey along dusty roads, they neared Yunkai outskirts. Scouts reported that Yunkai's rulers had indeed hired Sellswords, the Yellow Company, rumored to be fierce but smaller than the Second Sons. Rumor also spread that the city's slaves were less numerous than Astapor's, but still suffering brutal conditions. Daenerys refused to let them remain in chains. She convened a council of war, again excluding Viserys, who sulked in the background. Daario proposed a direct assault on the gates at night. Tormund suggested a demonstration of Dragonfire first, to frighten the city into surrender. Freedmen leaders argued that infiltration might spark an internal uprising. Daenerys listened, then turned to Jon. "What do you advise?" He sighed. "A direct assault risks the Sellswords digging in behind the walls. A quick infiltration might reduce casualties. We could replicate the Astapor approach, but Yunkai's masters might suspect a trick. Alternatively, we could show them Shadowfire from a distance and offer terms: free all slaves or face Dragonfire." Daenerys bit her lip. "I dislike giving them time to prepare, but perhaps the show of force can prompt a bloodless surrender. Let's try that first. If they refuse, we attack by night." They agreed. Yunkai's walls rose from the flat plain, the city's yellowish bricks giving it a sun-scorched hue. Late that afternoon, Daenerys led a small envoy within sight of the gates. She commanded the Unsullied to form ranks behind her, freedmen archers arrayed on the flanks. The Second Sons fanned out. Jon soared overhead on Shadowfire, casting an immense shadow over the city. The watchers on Yunkai's walls shouted in alarm. Daenerys rode forward, regal perched on her saddle, letting out small snarls. Her banner, a three-headed dragon of black on red, fluttered in the dry wind. She raised her voice, calling out that she came to free the slaves. "Relinquish your chains or I burn your city," she declared in the common tongue, repeated in Valyrian by Tormund. Archers at the walls drew bows, but none dared fire while the giant black dragon circled overhead. After a tense wait, an envoy emerged, 3 Yunkish slavers accompanied by a handful of Sellswords from the Yellow Company. One introduced himself as Grasdan Emotlak, sneering at Daenerys' threats. He claimed that Yunkai was no Astapor and that their Sellswords would repel any invasion. Daenerys responded by ordering Shadowfire to swoop low, unleashing a torrent of flame on an empty patch of field. The ground erupted in a sea of fire, scorching a line nearly 50 yards long. Grasdan and his retinue blanched, physically trembling at the sight of such destruction wrought with casual ease. Daenerys repeated her demand: "Free every slave or die." Grasdan asked for time to consult. Daenerys gave him until sunset, cautioning that if they tried any trickery, the city would burn. Freedmen scouts watched the walls for signs of mobilization. Daario's men circled behind dunes. Tormund prayed that the slavers would yield without bloodshed. Jon landed Shadowfire near Daenerys, the beast panting with exertion, the midday sun shimmering against black scales. "If they refuse," Jon murmured, "we'll attack by nightfall. I'll tear the gates down with Shadowfire. Then the Unsullied can sweep in. Freed slaves can rise within the city. They can't withstand an onslaught from every side." Daenerys nodded, a resolute glimmer in her eyes. "Yes, I pray they choose peace. Sunset drew near, painting the sky in swaths of crimson. Yunkai's gate opened again, and Grazdan reappeared, flanked by a fresh cadre of Sel's words. He approached Daenerys, scowling. We refuse your demands. Yunkai will not be bullied by a girl with a large pet. He gestured to the Yellow Company behind him. We stand ready to defend ourselves. Depart or face ruin. Daenerys's face hardened. She flicked a glance at Jon, who nodded. Then she addressed Grazdan in a carrying voice. So be it, she said. At dawn, we come for you. Remember you had a choice. She turned her horse away, ignoring Grazdan's insults. Friedman parted to let her pass. The second sons retreated quietly, though Dario spat curses at the Yunkish. Shadowfire roared overhead. That night, the Targaryen-led force prepared for battle. Viserys made a rare appearance in Daenerys' command tent. She and Jon were finalizing details. Friedman would scale the lesser walls to create a diversion. The Unsullied would breach the main gate once Shadowfire tore it down, and the second sons would storm from the west. The smaller dragons would remain safe behind the lines, though Daenerys might call upon them if needed. Viserys listened, bitterness radiating from him. Again you exclude me from leadership, he hissed. I am no foot soldier. Daenerys leveled a calm gaze on him. You have not proven capable of leading men, brother. If you truly wish to help, command a small flank of freedmen. Show compassion rather than demanding subservience. He glared. I'd rather lead the entire charge. Jon grunted. That's not happening. Viserys shot him a look of pure loathing. One day, you'll regret humiliating me. Then he stormed out. Daenerys exhaled, weariness clouding her features. Jon placed a hand on her arm. Ignore him, he said. Focus on tomorrow's fight. She nodded. They exchanged final words with Dario, then parted to rest, if possible. Dawn broke in a haze of orange light. The Targaryen army advanced on Yunkai's walls. Freedmen archers crept behind dunes. Unsullied formed disciplined ranks. Second sons rode in from the flanks. Jon soared above on Shadowfire, scanning for Sel's-word ambushes. He spotted a cluster of Yellow Company forces near the main gate, crossbows glinting. The city's defenders crouched behind parapets. The gate itself remained sealed. Jon inhaled, urging Shadowfire into a swift dive. The black dragon roared, unleashing a jet of flame that slammed into the thick wooden beams. The wood ignited, cracking under the intense heat. Sel's words on the wall fired crossbows, but the bolts bounced off Shadowfire's armored hide. Freedmen cheered from below, chanting Daenerys' name. Daenerys commanded the Unsullied to march. The gate smoldered, half collapsing. Another gout of dragonfire blasted it wide open, revealing the city streets beyond. Freedmen archers loosed arrows at Yellow Company crossbowmen, felling many. Daenerys' retinue rushed forward, joined by Dario's cavalry. Shouts and clangs of steel filled the morning air. Dust and smoke swirled in the narrow streets. Yunkai's defenders fought desperately, but the Unsullied carved through them with disciplined efficiency. Freed slaves rose inside the city, sabotaging gates and letting freedmen in. Chaos erupted behind the lines of slavers, who found themselves attacked from all sides. Shadowfire prowled overhead, scorching any rooftop from which archers tried to set ambushes. Jon guided the dragon carefully, mindful not to burn innocent slaves. The intense heat and swirling cinders made it difficult. Down in the main boulevard, Daenerys led a contingent of Unsullied, Drogon perched on her shoulder. She advanced relentlessly, ignoring begs for mercy from cowering slavers who threw down whips. Freedmen hammered open-collar locks, freeing chained men, women, children. The Yellow Company collapsed under the combined might of Second Sons and Unsullied. Some tried to surrender, others died in the street. By noon, Yunkai was effectively taken. Daenerys ordered a halt to the fighting, commanding that slavers who surrendered be bound for judgment. Freedmen raced through the city, celebrating. The newly liberated huddled in corners, stunned by their sudden freedom. Daenerys, dusty and sweat-soaked, ascended the steps of a lavish mansion that had belonged to Yunkai's leading master. She declared it open to the people. Freedmen thundered applause. Torum invoked Lawloress blessing. Dario flashed a roguish grin, saluting with a bloody sword. John landed Shadowfire in the central plaza, smoke rising from the dragon's jaws. The sight of so many cheering freedmen stirred something in John's chest. A mix of hope and awe. 2 cities liberated in short order. The slavers must be reeling. Viserys appeared, as if from nowhere, surveying the aftermath. Freedmen paid him no mind. He glowered at Daenerys as she accepted thanks from newly freed men. She had no time for him, guiding Yora to organize a local council akin to Astapor's. She repeated her formula. Slaves now rule themselves. The Unsullied, unbound by collars, chose to remain with Daenerys, forging an ever-growing army. Jon parted with her to check on the outskirts, ensuring no hidden pockets of sellswords remained. Dario took the Second Sons on a final sweep, collecting spoils where needed. By nightfall, Yunkai was fully under Targaryen control. Another victory. In a hastily cleared courtyard, freedmen built fires to celebrate. Musicians played flutes and drums, ex-slaves danced, children squealed in delight at the dragons overhead. Daenerys walked among them, bestowing kind words, occasionally healing small wounds. The freedmen called her Mysa, Mother. Jon, standing at a distance, felt a mixture of pride and unease. He believed in freeing slaves, but each victory fed the notion that Daenerys was a goddess figure, unstoppable. Where might that belief lead? Viserys lingered in a dark alcove, glaring. No one approached him with thanks or adoration. He felt worthless, overshadowed yet again. He watched Daenerys laugh with freedmen, saw Jon embraced by soldiers who lauded his monstrous black dragon, overheard jokes about the incompetent Targaryen brother. Hatred churned in his gut. He swore that one day he would show them all who truly deserved the throne. For now, he bided time, offering forced smiles when freedmen passed by. If Daenerys and Jon repeated their success in Meereen, they would command nearly all Slavers Bay. The freedmen hailed them as saviors. Where would that leave him? Daenerys, unaware of Viserys' bitter glare, conferred with Jon in the glow of a brazier near the city's center. Regal perched on her arm, fluttering wings to ward off desert flies. A hush hung over the battered streets. Tomorrow, we begin reorganizing Yunkai's leadership, Daenerys said. We must ensure no revenge killings spiral out of control. Freedmen had already threatened certain slaver families. She wanted justice, not anarchy. Jon brushed a hand across his brow, fatigue setting in. I'll help patrol. Meanwhile, the Unsullied can hold the gates. Then we push onward to Meereen. That's the real test. They say it's the largest city, with a great fighting pit and proud slaver traditions. He sighed. 2 cities might have been caught off guard, but the third will be forewarned. We can't rely on surprise. Daenerys nodded. We'll form alliances among the freedmen of Yunkai and Astapor, bringing them together. That plus the Unsullied, plus the Second Sons, plus our dragons. Meereen cannot stand alone if its slaves revolt as well. Then all Slavers Bay is freed. She paused, a spark in her eyes. It's what we set out to do. Even if King Robert sits on the Iron Throne, ignoring us, we'll create a realm of our own where no chain remains. Jon managed a small, weary grin. A realm of free people, guided by Targaryens who refused to repeat the sins of old. He squeezed her hand gently, forging a silent bond of trust. Torum approached, offering them water and murmuring that Lawloress flame blessed their cause once more. They accepted the water gratefully, too tired to debate theology. Then Dario appeared, flamboyant as ever, announcing with a flourish that the city was secure. My queen, my prince. The Yunkish slavers have either surrendered or fled. The freedmen celebrate in the plazas. What now? Shall we press on Meereen next week? Daenerys exchanged a look with Jon. We'll fortify Yunkai first, ensure a stable freedmen council. Then perhaps in a week we move. Meereen can't be allowed time to rally an enormous resistance. Dario bowed, satisfied. He parted to rejoin the festivities. Jon and Daenerys lingered a moment, scanning the newly freed city. The air brimmed with singing, laughter, tears of relief. Through the haze of torchlight, they glimpsed freed children playing with the smaller dragons. Ghost prowled at Jon's side, earning wary respect from passers-by who recognized the direwolf's unnatural aura. Shadowfire perched on a half-ruined tower, roaring occasionally at the celebrations below. For a fleeting instant, Jon believed they were indeed forging a better world. He recalled how the mad Red Priest's prophecies had failed to manifest exactly, yet now he understood the thrust. Dragons had returned, forging liberation in Essos. Perhaps war in Westeros was only a question of time. A rustle behind them made Jon spin. It was only Viserys skulking near, his face cast in half-shadow, eyes glittering with venom. He said nothing, only stared at Daenerys with raw jealousy. Then he turned on his heel and vanished into the darkness. Daenerys let out a sad sigh. He won't yield. No matter how many cities we free, he remains lost to envy. Jon rested a hand on her shoulder. We can't force him to care about the freed. Let him brood. Our path is set. She nodded. They turned back to the swirling celebration. Freedmen parted to let them pass, calling blessings, chanting Mysa at Daenerys and Fire Dragon at Jon, referencing Shadowfire's overwhelming might. The city's stench of old tyranny was giving way to new life. Over the next few days, Daenerys established a freedmen council for Yunkai, appointing local leaders who had once been slaves. The Unsullied patrolled the walls. Dario's second sons roamed the roads, intercepting any attempt by slaver survivors to regroup. Meanwhile, Viserys became more isolated, refusing to attend gatherings. Jon checked on him once, finding him in a dingy tavern corner. Viserys muttered that he'd never forget this humiliation, but offered no direct threat. Jon left him be, concluding that the older man was a simmering storm with no current outlet. When the time came to march on Meereen, Daenerys led a consolidated force. Astapor and Yunkai both offered freedmen volunteers eager to spread liberation. The Unsullied marched with quiet discipline. Shadowfire soared overhead, overshadowing the desert skies, while Rhaegal, Viserion, and Drogon circled in smaller arcs, learning from their elders' flight patterns. The freedmen who had once doubted Targaryens now carried banners depicting a three-headed dragon entwined with broken chains. Tormund and his red priests prayed each dawn for a swift victory. Dario boasted that no sellsword or slaver could stand against them. Viserys, forced to tag along, stewed at the rear, ignored by the freedmen. He occasionally snapped at a passing soldier or spat insults about Westeros, but few listened. Daenerys barely acknowledged him, focusing on the freed. Jon watched him warily, half expecting betrayal. But Viserys lacked allies to attempt anything rash. The freedmen despised him, the second sons mocked him, the red priests dismissed him. In effect, he was powerless. Their journey took them along the coast, where the air grew more humid. Meereen's silhouette eventually appeared. A grand city of pyramids overshadowing the waters, ringed by high walls. The spires glimmered, and great harpy statues loomed. This time, the Targaryen force advanced with caution. Scouts reported the city had readied more defenses, possibly including war machines. Freedmen inside Meereen whispered that the slavers were determined not to fall as Astapor and Yunkai had. Daenerys called her war council in the dunes outside the city. Dario recommended a night assault. Tormund advised intimidation first. Freedmen leaders wanted infiltration. Jon proposed a combination. Infiltration by freed slaves inside, plus a show of dragon force at the gates, plus a hidden cavalry flank from Dario. Daenerys listened to all, forging a cohesive plan. By now, she was confident in her leadership, and the freedmen revered her for it. Viserys attempted to insert himself into the debate, but Daenerys silenced him with a glare. "We have no time for your tantrums," she snapped. "Either stand with us or stand aside." Furious, he stormed out. Dario snorted in amusement. Jon tightened his jaw, uneasy. He feared Viserys might do something desperate. But he could not linger on that. The final conquest of Slaver's Bay beckoned. Night fell warm and sticky. The Targaryen-led force crept closer to Meereen's walls. Freed slaves within the city prepared to stir rebellion. Jon circled overhead on Shadowfire, scanning the ramparts. Daenerys advanced with the Unsullied, the Second Sons lurking in the darkness, freedmen archers hidden behind dunes. Tormund prayed for minimal bloodshed. Daenerys herself, flanked by Yora and her 3 smaller dragons, approached the main gate, calling for surrender in a ringing voice. The slavers responded with scornful laughter, launching bolts from scorpions perched on the walls. One bolt narrowly missed Daenerys' head. Furious, she signaled Shadowfire. Jon directed the dragon in a swooping dive, unleashing a torrent of flame that set the scorpion ablaze, men screaming. Freedmen cheered as the main gate caught. The city's defenders retaliated, but discipline wavered once they saw the monstrous black shape dominating the sky. Inside the city, freed slaves rose, setting fires, toppling harpy statues. The Unsullied outside battered the gate, ignoring arrow fire. Dario's cavalry charged a side entrance, overwhelming slavers who tried to defend it. Daenerys advanced with the freedmen, her face resolute. Regal, Viserion, and Drogon soared overhead, adding confusion. The slavers realized they faced unstoppable might from both outside and within. Soon, pockets of fighting erupted in every district. Freed slaves tore off collars, brandishing improvised spears. The city descended into chaos. Another scorpion shot a bolt that grazed Shadowfire's flank, eliciting a furious roar. Jon directed the dragon to incinerate the scorpion crew, the city's bricks glowing under the intense blaze. By sunrise, Meereen's high walls were compromised, its defenders broken. The freed slaves inside threw open the main gate. Daenerys rode through, Unsullied ranks following. They subdued the remaining slavers with systematic efficiency. Some slavers tried to hold a final pyramid, but the freedmen scaled it from within, capturing them. The city's harpy statue on the Great Pyramid came crashing down with a thunderous roar. Daenerys oversaw the final stand, her dragons perched on balconies, hissing at any sign of resistance. Freed slaves flooded the streets, chanting her name. Jon circled above on Shadowfire, ensuring no slaver escaped by ship. The entire bay shimmered with the dawn's reflection. When the last pockets of slavers surrendered, Daenerys proclaimed Slaver's Bay free. 3 cities in her grasp: Astapor, Yunkai, and Meereen, no chain unbroken. Freedmen crowned her Breaker of Chains, Mother of Dragons, lauding Jon as a king of black fire. Tormund praised R'hllor, though he cautioned them to remain humble. Daario grinned, exulting in the victory. The Unsullied pledged anew to Daenerys, forging a cohesive force across all 3 cities. The freed councils formed alliances to trade among themselves, uniting under Targaryen leadership. It was a near-bloodless triumph compared to typical conquests, though thousands died in the process. The aftermath was a swirling mixture of hope and grief, for many freedmen had lost loved ones under brutal slaver retaliation. But the future gleamed bright with possibility. Days later, Daenerys presided in Meereen's Great Pyramid, which now served as a symbol of freed rule. Freedmen from Astapor and Yunkai traveled to celebrate. A grand assembly took place in the throne room, though Daenerys insisted the dais remain open to all, no iron throne overshadowing them. Jon stood at her side, a silent pillar of support. The Red Priests lit braziers, chanting blessings. The freedmen hailed both Targaryens as liberators, forging a new domain. The Second Sons paraded in triumph, basking in applause, for they had proven critical in the siege. The Unsullied maintained stoic vigilance. The 3 smaller dragons perched on pillars, as if proud of their mother's achievement. Shadowfire roosted outside, occasionally letting out earth-shaking bellows. Viserys lingered at the periphery, unacknowledged. Freedmen who noticed him offered scorn, for they saw him as petty and jealous. He watched as Daenerys accepted tribute from newly formed freed councils. He heard them hail her as Mysa of Slaver's Bay, He saw Jon praised for riding the monstrous black dragon, overshadowing any memory of Viserys' supposed kingship. The sight stoked his resentment beyond measure. When the assembly ended, Daenerys and Jon retired to a smaller chamber to discuss the next steps. Consolidating this new freed alliance, ensuring Meereen's harbor reopened under freed labor, distributing farmland to the ex-slaves. Daario and Tormund joined them briefly, but eventually left, sensing the two Targaryens might need privacy. Daenerys rubbed her temples, exhausted. We've done it, but the responsibilities have only begun. Thousands look to us for leadership. Each city has its own freed council, yet they want a unifying figure. They call me queen. I never sought to be queen of Slaver's Bay. Jon smiled gently. Yet you are, in effect. You've done more good here than all the lords of Westeros combined. The freed will want you to remain. Maybe that's your purpose. She looked at him with shining eyes. Our purpose, she corrected. I'd not have succeeded without you. They revere you as well, especially with that great black dragon at your command. We are Targaryens building a realm of free people. She let out a soft laugh. I suspect we've overshadowed every prophecy that old mad priest uttered. Jon chuckled, recalling the priest's dire predictions about immediate war in Westeros. We might have proven some of it right. Dragons returned, a new dominion, but the war in Westeros remains a distant whisper. For now, we shape Essos. She nodded, exhaling. Still, I wonder what Ned Stark and King Robert think of us, if they hear at all. Perhaps they dismiss rumors of Targaryen conquests in Slaver's Bay. Or maybe they quake at the thought of dragons. She set aside the thought. We must focus on feeding and housing all these freedmen. Once that is done, we can contemplate the future. We might even have enough ships eventually to cross the narrow sea. But do we want to? Jon considered. If Robert threatens us, we might have no choice. For now, let Westeros remain ignorant. The freed deserve stability first. He paused, glancing at the door. What of Viserys? Daenerys' expression fell. He's unreachable. I suspect he might flee or attempt something rash. But I have no time for coddling him. If he stirs rebellion among the freed, I'll have no choice but to exile him. Jon nodded slowly. Let's keep an eye on him. Meanwhile, we have a realm to nurture. He turned as the door opened, revealing a freedman messenger who bowed low. The man announced that the city's new council awaited Daenerys' presence to plan distribution of farmland. She sighed, rising to her feet. It never ends. Come, help me. They walked out together, the corridor lined with freedmen who parted in awe. Rhaegal, Viserion, and Drogon flitted overhead, chirping. Ghost padded behind Jon, silent as ever, resurrected life shimmering in his red eyes. In the distance, the roar of Shadowfire reverberated, a living testament to Targaryen might. The corridor opened onto a balcony overlooking Meereen's vast streets. Freed people bustled below, forging a new society. Daenerys inhaled the warm air, letting the city's hum fill her senses. She clasped Jon's hand. We've begun something bigger than us. Let's see it through. He squeezed her fingers. Yes, together. They descended to meet the council, forging a new chapter for Slaver's Bay, one free from chains, shaped by dragons, freedmen, and improbable alliances. And though Viserys seethed in jealousy, overshadowed and bitter, Daenerys and Jon pressed forward, determined to prove that Targaryens could do more than burn cities. They could reshape a corner of the world in an image of liberty and justice. Whether Westeros ever beckoned them back or not, their destiny now lay with the freed, the triumphant roars of dragons overhead, and the promise of a realm built on freedom rather than fear.